Caleb Whitmore stepped out into the crisp Tennessee morning, coffee in hand, and found a neon orange violation notice stapled to the side of his beloved chicken coop. The dew still clung to the grass, and the soft hum of the radio inside the kitchen murmured an old bluegrass tune. His breath fogged as he approached the coop, the scent of damp earth and cedar in the air. Ellie's hens clucked softly, jostling around their feed trays, oblivious to the garish paper fluttering in the breeze. Caleb squinted, then reached out and tore it from the wood with a slow, steady hand. His eyes scanned the bolded letters. Unauthorized livestock, $300 fine per month. He glanced up at the old barn, weather-beaten and noble, where his father once leaned after mending the roof and told him, "This land won't defend itself. One day you'll have to stand for it." Caleb let the memory settle before folding the notice neatly and tucking it into his shirt pocket. Back in the kitchen, Martha was flipping biscuits onto a clean dish towel, her hair pinned up in its usual morning coil. The smell of warm butter and blackberry jam filled the room. Ellie sat cross-legged at the kitchen table, boots still dusty from the coop, excitedly sharing stories about Butterbean, their most curious hen, and how she'd figured out how to peck the latch open. Caleb dropped the notice onto the table. Ellie leaned forward, grin fading. "Seriously? A fine?" Martha wiped her hands on her apron. "Let me guess. Karen?" "She stapled it right to the coop," Caleb said, pouring himself a fresh cup of coffee. "Bold move," Ellie scoffed. "But we're allowed to have chickens. We looked that up." Martha already had the HOA rulebook pulled from the drawer, flipping through its pages with the precision of someone who had argued against a library late fee and won. "Here it is," she said. "No mention of chickens. Livestock isn't even defined." Caleb took the book, turning it in his hands like something fragile. "We need to be careful," he muttered. "This isn't just about the chickens." Later that morning, they saw her, Karen Albright, in her perfectly ironed pastel jacket, marching down the sidewalk with her clipboard and phone in hand. She stopped across the street, turned briefly, and offered a thin smile. Caleb crossed the yard and met her by the edge of the sidewalk. "Morning, Mr. Whitmore," she said, not looking up from her clipboard. "You received our notice?" "I did," he said. "Good, just ensuring consistency." She glanced toward the coop. "We're modernizing Elk Ridge. Livestock sends the wrong message." "They're not livestock," Caleb said, his voice calm. "They're hens, my daughter's hens." Karen smiled politely. "Everything has its place, and these days we all make sacrifices for the community aesthetic." Caleb tilted his head. "We've lived here for 40 years. The hens haven't offended anyone." Karen tapped her pen. 40 years is a long time, but neighborhoods grow, tastes change, and ordinances evolve. She walked on, tapping her phone as she went, her clipboard swinging at her side. That night, after Ellie had gone upstairs and Martha was folding laundry in the den, Caleb stepped out into the barn. The air was thick with the smell of old wood and hay. Mice had made a home in the corner, and the tin roof pinged gently in the breeze. He climbed the old wooden ladder to the loft, flashlight in hand. It wasn't the first time he'd come here when something felt off. Tucked under a dusty quilt was a tin box marked in faded black marker. Dad, Deeds and Maps. He sat on the floor and set the flashlight down, letting it cast long shadows across the hay. The box creaked open. Inside were folded county maps, receipts from the 70s, and a letter-sized envelope, yellowed with time, marked in careful cursive. Agricultural designation, parcel number 71A, Whitmore Holdings, 1965. His breath caught. He turned the envelope over slowly, the old paper stiff and grainy under his fingertips. It bore the county seal in wax, long hardened but still visible. He ran a finger along the seal and muttered, "Let's see if you're still worth something after all these years." By the next morning, everyone in town was talking about Caleb's chickens. Not the coop, but the commotion they were supposedly causing. At Dottie's diner, the air buzzed not with the clink of silverware or the hiss of eggs frying, but with whispers that shifted from table to table. A regular in a John Deere cap leaned over his coffee and said, "Remember what happened to the Millers? They had goats. HOA buried them in fines." Someone else muttered, "Didn't they say the Whitmore chickens are bringing in rats now?" It didn't matter if the rumors were true. They had taken root. Caleb entered quietly, nodding to Dottie behind the counter. She offered a half-smile and poured him a cup of black coffee without asking. He took a booth near the window, same as always, but this morning the booth felt smaller. Claustrophobic. Across the diner, Roger Delaney gave a polite nod, then looked away. Tom Jenkins, in his usual corner seat, simply chewed on his toast, unreadable behind thick glasses. Even Mrs. Baker, usually chatty about her grandkids, avoided eye contact. The sense of isolation crawled up Caleb's spine like frost in April. Back home, Ellie sat on the porch steps, letting a chicken perch beside her on the railing. "They're scared of her," she said when Caleb joined her, steaming mug in hand. "Karen's got them thinking the hens are diseased." "They're hens, not locusts," Caleb replied. "She's already winning, Dad. You going to let her?" Martha stepped out, holding a manila folder. "We need to check the land records. I've got a feeling this isn't just about chickens." The county records office was 2 blocks off Main, tucked between the post office and a hardware store that hadn't changed its window display since 1994. Inside, a ceiling fan spun lazily above rows of filing cabinets. The clerk, a man named Dennis, who'd once played shortstop for the Elk Ridge Owls, adjusted his bifocals as Martha laid out their request. Whitmore property, agricultural filings, that'd be under legacy zoning. He disappeared behind the counter and returned with a dusty blue folder. "Filed 1965, he said. "Joseph Whitmore, your father, right?" Caleb nodded slowly. Dennis handed him the folder like it was a relic. Inside were typewritten documents, all bearing the faded seal of the county zoning board. One page in particular stood out. Agricultural use rights, parcel number 71A. There was no expiration date. "It was never revoked?" Martha asked. Dennis shook his head. "Not unless the county reassigned it, which I don't see any notation here." He paused. "This is old-school binding." Back in the truck, Ellie flipped through the pages, wide-eyed. "Why didn't you tell me we had this?" "I didn't know we still did," Caleb said quietly. "HOA pushed your granddad to sell the South End years ago. I figured they'd forced the rest through, too." "So they bullied him?" she said. Caleb sighed. "He gave in for peace. I tried to fight for it once, back when the HOA got formed. They threatened liens, lawsuits. I let it go." Ellie looked at him, something flickering behind her eyes. "I won't let it go." That night, in the warm light of the dining room, Martha sifted through the envelope again. Tucked inside, nearly hidden under a folded map, she found a smaller document, a notarized letter dated April 7th, 1965. The ink was faded, but legible. "Agricultural rights in perpetuity, binding until county reassignment." Martha pressed it flat on the table and handed it to Caleb. He stared at it, saying nothing. She flipped open her laptop. "There's something else. I was looking through HOA board minutes. You know who shows up in the correspondence?" "Karen?" "Devlin Development Group. They've been sniffing around since last fall." Caleb rubbed his chin. "They tried to buy the west parcel 2 years ago. I told them it wasn't for sale." Ellie stood up, holding the fellowship application she hadn't yet mailed. She opened her mouth, then closed it. Instead, she tucked the envelope back into her bag and slipped out to the barn. The next morning, they returned to the county office. Dennis adjusted his glasses again as they laid the letter in front of him. He read it once, then again. His eyebrows rose. Karen's HOA can't touch you unless they've got the county in their pocket. The emergency HOA meeting was scheduled for a Tuesday night. Short notice, limited seating, conveniently during the Elk Ridge Softball League playoffs. At 6 sharp, Caleb stood outside the community center, arms folded, watching as neighbors trickled in. Martha had suspected the timing was deliberate. Softball playoffs always pulled half the town to the park, including the most vocal critics of the HOA. Inside, folding chairs were arranged in neat, narrow rows. A coffee urn sputtered in the corner, paper cups stacked beside stale sugar packets. The HOA banners on the walls looked newly printed, the type too bold, too polished. Tom Jenkins leaned in close and muttered under his breath, "Same tactics, different president. I've seen this rodeo before." Karen stood at the front in a salmon blazer that matched the glow of her PowerPoint presentation. Her face was composed, but Caleb saw the strain in her fingers as she adjusted the mic. He'd seen it before, on a mule before it bolted. The meeting began with brisk formality. Karen launched into her slideshow, clicking through drone images of Caleb's yard. She paused on an aerial view of the coop, zooming in. "As you can see," she said, voice tight, "the enclosure fails to meet our updated sanitation perimeter regulations. Multiple violations here: fencing, proximity to adjacent property, visible clutter." Martha leaned toward Caleb and whispered, "There are no updated regulations." Karen continued, "We've also received several anonymous complaints about pests and odor." "That's false," Caleb called out from his seat. Karen didn't flinch. "Please, Mr. Whitmore, you'll have a chance to speak. But for now, let's keep order." She clicked again. Another slide popped up, footage from what looked like early morning. Karen narrated, "This video was captured at 5:47 a.m. Note the open gate and unsecured waste bin." Ellie turned red beside him. "That's the day Butterbean got out," she whispered. "She followed me into the barn." When Karen finally opened the floor, Caleb stood. His boots echoed across the linoleum as he walked to the front, holding a thin manila folder. "I'd like to submit a document into the record," he said, voice steady. Karen's eyes narrowed. "You'll need board approval." "Actually," Caleb replied, "per Section 4.3 of the HOA Charter, any resident may present documentation at an open meeting." He unfolded the deed and held it up. This land, parcel number 71A, was designated agricultural use in 1965. That status has never been revoked, never reassigned by the county. Karen's lips parted, then pressed shut. She reached for her binder. "You may believe HOA guidelines supersede that," Caleb continued, "but legal precedent and zoning law disagree." Karen interjected, "We passed a clarification bylaw last fall. It broadens the board's scope regarding residential compatibility. It applies retroactively." Martha stood. "You mean the bylaw that removed agricultural protections without a resident vote?" Caleb opened the folder again and produced a second sheet. "This is the original draft of that amendment. It contains a redlined clause titled Exempt Agricultural Parcels. It was in the version sent to the board, but it never appeared in the final one you submitted." The room hushed. Neighbors looked around. Some leaned forward. Ellie stepped up beside her father. Her voice was clear, not loud, but steady. "These hens aren't just pets. They're part of our history. My grandfather built that coop when this town was still surrounded by cornfields, not condos. We're not asking for special treatment. We're asking for respect." Mrs. Baker clutched the tomato-shaped pin on her sweater. Roger shifted in his seat. In the back, someone quietly set down a copy of The Ridge Voice. Karen's fingers tapped her clipboard, Faster now. We followed protocol, she snapped. The board approved. I was on that committee, Tom Jenkins said, rising slowly from the second row. That clause was never removed legally. Karen froze. For a beat, she said nothing at all. Then she turned to the screen behind her, suddenly unsure where to click next. The next morning, Caleb's mailbox held a thick envelope stamped Urgent HOA Legal Action Initiated. He turned it over twice, feeling the weight before opening it with a slow, deliberate tear. Inside were 6 stapled pages, neatly typed and dripping with legalese. The HOA, acting in the interest of public health and neighborhood integrity, had filed for a court injunction. Their aim was clear: override his agricultural deed by citing his property as a public nuisance. Ellie, reading over his shoulder, muttered, "She's not just after the chickens, is she?" Caleb didn't answer, but his silence said enough. Back at the kitchen table, Martha laid out the documents alongside her laptop and a yellow legal pad. The morning sun stretched across the room, lighting up stacks of printed HOA correspondence and community newsletters. Caleb leaned over the table with a pencil in hand, circling key phrases. Health hazard. Exceeds acceptable livestock density. Visual disruption to neighborhood character. Martha clicked her tongue. Look at this. Meeting minutes from March 10th. Not an official meeting, marked informal in the header, and yet they're discussing converting your backfield into community amenities. Park benches and bike paths? Caleb asked. Or condo driveways, she said. He stood up and reached for his jacket. I'm going to town. The Devlin Real Estate Office sat on the edge of Elk Ridge's historic district in a building that used to be the town's post office. The brass letters over the door gleamed too brightly for a weekday. Inside, the receptionist greeted Caleb with a tight smile and a clipboard full of intake forms. He waved them off. I'm here about Parcel 71A, he said. Whitmore land. The woman blinked. I'll get Mr. Devlin. Mark Devlin came out with a handshake too firm and a grin too polished. Mr. Whitmore, heard your name a lot lately. Caleb ignored the pleasantries. I just have one question. Is Karen Albright a client of yours? Devlin's smile didn't waver. Our files are confidential, Mr. Whitmore. Then don't answer, Caleb said. But tell her next time she tries to annex my land, she should bring a county map and a conscience. Back at home, Ellie had taken matters into her own hands. She sat at her laptop, editing a short video showing the chicken coop, her grandfather's photo, and clips of her walking with Butterbean. The voiceover was simple. My family has lived here for 3 generations. We're not developers. We're caretakers. She posted it to the town's community page. By dinner, it had nearly 300 views, high for Elk Ridge. Later that evening, Caleb opened the mailbox again. Another piece of HOA propaganda had arrived. This time, it was glossy, full color, and folded into thirds. The cover showed a zoomed-in photo of Caleb's coop, taken at an unflattering angle, with the headline, When Chickens Cross the Line. Inside, it listed sanitary concerns and cherry-picked regulations. The final page asked residents to protect property values by supporting necessary legal measures. Caleb tossed it on the kitchen counter without a word. Martha, eyes narrowed, made a call. An hour later, she was on a video call with a former state zoning attorney she'd once met at a civic leadership seminar. She slid the camera toward the deed and began reading aloud. When the call ended, she turned to Caleb. He says if we can show the deed was never voided by the county and there's no superseding rezoning, the HOA can't legally touch your parcel. They're bluffing. Then we'll call it, Caleb said. Martha nodded. We'll need exhibits, historical maps, testimony. If they want a legal fight, we give them one. As they gathered papers late into the evening, the porch light clicked on. Caleb rose and opened the door to find his neighbor Roger standing awkwardly with hands in his pockets. "You didn't hear it from me," Roger said quietly, glancing over his shoulder. "But Karen's meeting with the county zoning board tomorrow, behind closed doors." On a bright Monday morning, the Elk Ridge Courthouse parking lot was unusually full, but most of the folks weren't there to watch a criminal trial. They were here for the chickens. Caleb parked under the old maple tree at the edge of the lot, taking a moment before stepping out. Martha sat beside him, leafing through her annotated folder, calm as ever. Ellie adjusted her blazer in the back seat, one hand gripping a thick binder. Through the windshield, they saw neighbors arriving on foot, in pickups and sedans, some in work boots, others in Sunday clothes. The courtroom was only meant to seat 40. By 8:45, it held more than 50. Tom Jenkins met Caleb at the door and offered a rough handshake. "Doesn't matter if you win or lose," he said. "Just showing up changes things." Inside, the courtroom smelled faintly of lemon oil and old law books. The judge's bench stood beneath the Elk Ridge seal, faded but firm. Oak-paneled walls creaked as people settled in. Judge Hayes entered promptly at 9. His robe was neat, his face unreadable. The bailiff called the case. Caleb's attorney, a silver-haired local named Peter Hallowell, opened with quiet confidence. "Your Honor, we present deed number 71A, recorded in 1965, establishing this parcel as agricultural under county law. The deed has never been revoked or reassigned. We also present certified maps and letters confirming the parcel's zoning history." Martha passed each document with deliberate care. The clerk stamped each into the record. Karen, sitting stiff beside her attorney, stared ahead. Her lawyer stood. "Your Honor, while we do not contest the existence of this deed, the HOA has legal authority to enforce neighborhood standards. Mr. Whitmore's failure to comply with basic sanitation and aesthetic regulations poses a disruption to community harmony." Judge Hayes raised an eyebrow. "We'll let the evidence speak to that." Karen's lawyer continued. "Furthermore, Mr. Whitmore has been uncooperative. He refused multiple requests for compliance and has publicly criticized HOA leadership." "I've criticized their tactics," Caleb said from the witness chair, "not the leadership, though sometimes they're one and the same." A soft murmur rippled through the gallery. Ellie stepped up next. She laid her binder on the podium and opened to a page of color photos, her feeding the hens, the coop cleaned and orderly, neighbors waving over the fence. "This isn't about sanitation," she said. "It's about erasing what this town used to be." She flipped to a second section, 31 handwritten letters from residents, Roger, Mrs. Baker, even Dottie from the diner, supporting the Whitmores. Tom was next. He moved slowly, but spoke clearly. "In 1989, the HOA tried the same thing, pushed to seize the Rollins family lot using code citations. Same kind of deed saved it. Folks back then stood up too." Judge Hayes leaned back, fingers steepled. "And this HOA, how is it funded?" Karen's lawyer hesitated. "By homeowner dues, Your Honor." "Please submit the last 3 years of board expenditures for the record," Hayes said. Karen stiffened. Her attorney whispered something, but she only nodded stiffly. The final witness was Dennis, the zoning clerk. He confirmed the deed standing. "This parcel's designation was never changed by county order. It remains agricultural under state zoning law." The courtroom quieted as Judge Hayes reviewed the folder, flipping slowly through its contents. Finally, he looked up. "This court finds that the deed presented is valid and binding. The HOA has exceeded its authority in attempting to override a protected agricultural designation. Accordingly, the injunction is denied." He set the folder aside. "Furthermore, I am ordering a financial audit of the HOA board's expenditures for the past 3 years, effective immediately." Gasps echoed in the room. Some neighbors applauded softly. Caleb didn't smile, but he allowed himself a long, exhaled breath. Karen gathered her things without a word. Outside, the sun had climbed higher, casting warm light across the courthouse steps. A cluster of reporters had gathered near the sidewalk, camera phones raised. One leaned forward with a microphone. "Mr. Whitmore, what happens next?" Caleb looked out over the parking lot, where Roger was shaking hands with Tom, and Ellie stood hugging Mrs. Baker. He replied, "We clean house, properly this time." 2 weeks later, the welcome sign outside Caleb's land had a new hand-painted addition. Agricultural Zone, Community Protected. The sun was already warm by mid-morning, and the field beyond the barn shimmered with green. A spring breeze carried the scent of honeysuckle and wood smoke as Caleb tightened the last screw into the signpost, then stepped back to admire Ellie's careful lettering. It wasn't fancy, but it said what needed saying. Inside the house, Martha placed the old deed back into its frame. She smoothed the parchment gently before taping a small note beneath it. Renewed, April 2023. She set it on the mantel beside a black and white photo of Caleb's father holding a young calf, both squinting in the sun. At the community field on the edge of town, booths were already lining up under striped tents. It was spring market day in Elk Ridge, and the turnout was bigger than anyone expected. Neighbors passed mason jars of canned peaches, potted seedlings, hand-sewn aprons. Kids ran between tables, chasing each other with paper pinwheels, while Ellie sat beside a small chicken wire pen holding 2 of her hens. Caleb arrived just in time to catch Mrs. Baker arranging tomato starts on a gingham-covered table. Her pin, a small red tomato, gleamed in the sun. "I see your campaign's going strong," Caleb said, tipping his cap. Mrs. Baker grinned. "Someone's got to keep this new board honest." On the notice board near the field entrance, a printed copy of Karen Albright's resignation letter had been thumbtacked beside the chili cook-off sign. It was as dramatic as expected, 2 pages blaming small-town backwardness and resistance to progress. Most folks had skimmed it and moved on. Word around town was that Devlin had pulled out of his exploratory plans for Elk Ridge quietly, not wanting to draw attention after the audit revealed HOA funds had been used to build a backyard greenhouse and a luxury coop on Karen's own property. "She said your chickens lowered property values," Tom Jenkins said, appearing beside Caleb with 2 cups of lemonade. "Turns out hers cost us $12,000. Caleb chuckled softly. "And mine just lay eggs." The new HOA board was sworn in that morning. Mrs. Baker, Tom, and a retired librarian named Eunice had taken seats once reserved for Karen's hand-picked allies. Their first act? A resolution to formally protect all agricultural parcels within Elk Ridge boundaries, retroactive to 1965. Ellie took the stage as the community applauded the new board. Her voice trembled for only the first few words, then steadied. "I've spent the past month thinking about what this land means, not just to my family, but to this whole town. I'm proud to say I've been awarded a state agricultural grant to help preserve and restore heritage farming practices. That means I'll be staying right here, building something that lasts." The crowd clapped, not loud, but warm and lasting. As the sun sank lower, casting gold over the field, Caleb stood at the edge of the booth line, watching it all unfold. Neighbors were laughing again. Kids were kneeling beside the hen pen, whispering names to the birds. Someone was playing a guitar off near the lemonade stand. The world hadn't changed much, but it had shifted just enough. Martha joined him with a slice of peach pie and a wink. "Ellie's speech beat yours, hands down." "Didn't write one," Caleb said. "That's why." Back at the house that evening, the porch light clicked on just as Caleb reached into the mailbox. Among circulars and a seed catalog was a cream-colored envelope addressed in neat cursive. He opened it carefully, It was from a nearby town, Mason Hill. They were hosting a regional land rights forum next month and wanted him to speak on preserving agricultural legacies. He read the note twice, then smiled. Might be time to take this coop on the road. Sometimes all it takes is one coop, one family, and a bit of old paper to remind a town what truly matters. In standing firm, Caleb didn't just protect his land. He helped his neighbors rediscover their roots and reclaim their voice. Justice, when nurtured like a well-tended field, always bears fruit in time. And perhaps that's the quiet strength of a farm. It holds the memory of those who built it and the hope of those who will keep it alive. Like good soil, community grows best when no one's left behind the fence.